Welcome to the Spirit of Business, episode number 56. What if you can predict the future? With Matt Murphy and Sarah McCrum.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Matt. I am in the middle of a deep inquiry and question, and that basically means I'm feeling rather daunted. From several conversations I've had this week, one with you and another with another colleague, and a conversation I've just been in. I literally am off the back of it now, which was with a group that's called the Conscious Business Synergy Circle. And that's a group of leaders all over the world who are looking at how we can bring together business and consciousness. Consciousness being about being more awake, we can say, or being not just business for business sake, but really putting it in the context of life and purpose and meaning, and what are we really doing here, and how does our business express that? But what strikes me, because this is an area that I've been working in for a long time, and it's not easy because it's pioneering in a way, so that always makes it harder. Just what strikes me is how daunting the task is ahead of us. And the reason I say that is because if you just take the Sustainable Development Goals, in the meeting I was in just now, again, it was said business is probably the most powerful way to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, they include things like universal free healthcare, obviously ending hunger and ending poverty, gender equality, really big topics that we do not have at the moment. You know, these are big topics across the world, in Western societies and also in societies that are less developed than the Western ones. So I look at that, and then I look at the pressure that we're experiencing currently now, both around, so we're experiencing pressure around health, we're experiencing pressure around money, and that's likely to increase because of what's happened the last year. And we're experiencing pressure around nature and our relationship with nature and the impact we have on nature, to the extent that we know, as I've mentioned before, we're in the 6th mass extinction on this planet. We may or may not be part of that extinction, and it does seem most likely to depend on how we behave. So it's not just, it's like, oh, it would be so nice to make business more purposeful. It's that at some level, we need to pull together to create solutions that actually address the real issues. And that means us addressing the issues in ourselves as much as it does in our businesses. And the thing that's so daunting about it for me is that it then touches into everything. How do we communicate with each other? How do we think about ourselves as business owners or participants in business? And how do we think about each other and see each other? How do we interact with technology? Do we let technology run the show? What would be the consequences for our future, the future of humanity and the planet, if we let technology run the show, which we could do, or if we allow ourselves to burn out and work in a way that causes burnout, which we could do, or if we just keep our nose to the grindstone and just keep doing business as usual so that we support our families, but don't take so much account of the wider community, which we could do, because we're doing all of those things. Now, of course, we're all challenged by the questions that are being asked and raised through everything that's going on at the moment. And everyone feels tired. That's the other thing. That was raised in this meeting I was just in. Somebody said, you know what? Most people who are running businesses or who are leading in some way are really tired. And most people who are not are also tired, because they were already tired. And then we've had this overload over the last year of additional pressure, like being in a war. That's very tiring. So people are tired, and at the same time, we are needing to step up and get way more conscious about everything we're doing. And I look at that, and sometimes I look in the context of what it's taken me just to do what I've done so far, which doesn't feel like very much. It's a lot, and it's not very much. And I feel daunted, honestly. It's like, oh my goodness, I don't know how to do this. I just don't know how to do it. I know what needs to be done, I think. Probably I'm wrong, but I don't know how to do it.
Wow, there's so much in that. um, I don't even know where to start with that, to be quite honest, because there is so much that you spoke about. Any wonder you're feeling overwhelmed and daunted about it because you're looking at it from a very large scale. You're looking at it from a global world, you know, issues that plaguing the whole world, not just what we have locally, or in Australia, for example. We're talking about world issues that have been around for centuries, and you're trying to work out ways in which some of those very large problems that probably haven't been fully solved yet, you're trying to solve for.
Well, I'm really
And
trying to see what is the little piece that I can do that makes a difference, that helps, and that we can do just through this podcast, for example, that contributes to that, because we're talking to businesses and business owners, and we're saying businesses are the key to the solution, and business as normal is not the key to the solution.
so I think that's a really great starting point because what we're talking about, and this has been a theme that we've spoken about a fair bit over the podcast and also just generally, is that business is the key to change
Yeah.
because we sort of don't believe that governments obviously do change, but business does influence governments, business influences the community. It's an integral part because it drives sort of the GDP, it drives so many things in the world that it's a key to change. And so that's what you're saying there is that if business is a catalyst and a key to change, then what do we have to do in business to help solve some of these issues that we've had for centuries or forever, really, in the human race? And I think that's a good starting point because it's really saying, well, in our businesses, what can we do? As you just said then, what can you do in your business that will actually help the greater good? Which means that if we all pull together, as you say, every business in the world pulls together in the heading in the right direction, then we should be able to solve most of the issues that you just spoke about then. Now, they're being raised at the moment. You talked about consciousness as one of the first things you said, consciousness in business. And I think that we're currently being challenged a lot by things that are being raised in the community, whether that's equality, whether that's environment, whether that's you reeled off a whole number of them, and I can see that these are issues that we've got to solve. Where my mind also goes is to say, well, how much progression have we actually made to date? Because being overwhelmed means that you can't see how to achieve what you want to achieve. So then a way that I help business owners when they do get into this overwhelmed situation is to talk about progression. Well, how far have we come? Because if we talk about how far we've come, then that can sort of say, well, okay, well, we've come a certain period of time or a certain distance, or we've achieved a certain amount, which then says, well, okay, well, it's not like we haven't done anything or haven't achieved anything or haven't progressed anything. Because what that does is it gives us some comfort or motivation. So, okay, well, we have shown and demonstrated the example where we can achieve something. So that gives us the momentum to say, well, okay, what can we now achieve heading towards the bigger goals? And I think I was trying to get a reference point or a frame or where we're at, really understanding where we're at right now. And when you spoke about poverty, you introduced me to a book a number of years ago that I read that spoke about poverty, statistics on poverty and a lot of the things that are happening. And the book, was titled "The World is Better Than What You Think It Is." Okay, so it's I can't remember exactly the title, but it was something like that. And it was just all world statistics talking about over centuries, what's been the progression. And one of the progressions is that real poverty that they talk about, and they define what real poverty is, was down to something like 9% of the world's population. Now, that's still high, but compared to where it was, you'd say, well, we've made progression. So when anyone feels overwhelmed or daunted, I like to sort of put it into a frame to say, or continue to say, that's zero, and that's, 100, meaning that's where we want to get to, being 100. Where are we on that particular line? And some of the things that I think you raised, we might be in the negative because we're going backwards. That if you talk about
Possibly
extinction, right? We're
well,
going,
also if you talk about poverty, we went backwards a lot in the last year, unfortunately.
yeah, that's right. So therefore, there's a we're not always moving forward, and sometimes we move back into the negative, and so therefore we also have to recognize that particular part of it as well. But to address being over, like, I think it's great that we're acknowledging those particular things and they're surfacing. And yes, we can see the what we can do together in the big picture. But I also want to address, where how far we've come, because you spoke about tiredness, and tiredness is a big thing, and I understand that. One of the things that I recognise, I'm just about to go on leave for a week, and I need to go on leave for a week because I'm really tired, and it sort of gets to a certain point, and it's tired. We know there's degrees of tiredness in terms of generally tired and fatigued all the time because you've been working too hard, compared to just being tired of certain situations of being in business. So there's two levels of that. I understand that. So when I think about the tiredness can be overcome if you feel like you're progressing and there's a motivation there. And that's why I, I like to sort of address the problems that you're speaking about, or address the issues that you're speaking about, by saying, well, where are we at right now? Okay, how far have we come, if we have come away? And then that hopefully then says, okay, well, now we understand how far we can progress. What's the next plan, and what's the next step forward? What's the thing we do tomorrow that keeps us heading in the right direction?
Well, that's probably the reason why I'm feeling what I'm feeling. I've been in several conversations. I was in one last week with a group of leaders around my topic, which is your relationship with money. Because my kind of deeper understanding is that if we continue with the average relationship with money that people have at the moment contributes to the problematic aspects of the way that we're living. We talk all the time about things like the greed, the issues around corporations controlling things that they shouldn't, and that's all because of relationship with money. And you see the same patterns in individuals. So if we just take it from the perspective that I'm interested in, because I'm not trying to solve all the problems, I'm trying to do my little bit that will contribute in that direction. I guess what sort of led to this feeling daunted goes back a little bit, and a conversation with some leaders, very conscious leaders, and realizing that their relationship with money is it's not like a child's relationship with money, but it's so, I just felt it's not very conscious, not very evolved. So some of the people who are really working in the space of consciousness and very much on the cutting edge of evolution when it comes to the way they think about money, they really haven't done anything. It's like a fantasy almost, or variations of just not great relationships with money. And that's what I think made me think, oh my goodness, there is, for the work that I do, and I'm not the only person who does it in the world, of course, and I influence people all the time as well, and some of them will do it too. But for the work that I do, it feels like, actually, I feel like I've hardly started. Now, I know that's not the answer to the question. I can look in my own life, I can look at people who I have worked with, and I can see what we have achieved. I can see many people who used to worry about money and don't worry about money. I can see the beginning of people communicating with each other about that, so it creates a sense of community around it's possible to have a relationship with money where you don't worry about it. So it's a kinder, gentler relationship, which causes you to make better decisions, wiser decisions about money. And if I expand that out, I can see that at a certain point things take off at a different level, or a synergy emerges because different groups come together that are going in the same direction. That's not something that is happening particularly at the moment, but that can happen anytime and you don't know when it's going to happen. So my job is to keep working in the direction that I'm working, just keep doing what I do, not really knowing. I can keep tabs a little bit on the impact. I don't really know that much of the influence I'm having because most of it's a very personal experience for people, and it's up to them. And I don't know what's being shared or not being shared because that's what they do. I just do my bit. But I can say that if we look through the lens of how we relate with money, I think we're right at the beginning of that work. We're really at the beginning of it. That people who I see working in that space more publicly, I long to have a conversation with them as well. So, yeah, there's a lot that lies ahead, I would say.
There is, and maybe I get very practical in these situations and conversations just because of that's my history of trying to fix and solve. And I know that not everything in the world can be fixed and solved by that way of thinking. So I certainly get that. Um, but listening to you, I get the energy in the sense that there is a beginning and an overwhelm because we are at the beginning. So therefore, you don't feel like there's been much of a progression. Because if you're at the beginning, you don't have anything to draw upon to suggest that you've got some momentum to get to where you want to get to. Going back to that sort of line that I spoke about before, the continuum, because you feel like you're right at the very beginning. And when you're starting something, that there's a Confucius that says that the journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step, so to speak. So from that perspective, it's you're feeling like you've got to start that one step, which is daunting because you're thinking about the 1,000 miles.
It's not that. It's actually I know that I've taken already a lot of steps. It's that with what I'm seeing at the moment, those steps are not going to reach the desired outcome. Now, I don't know what steps other people are taking. I don't know what will click together. So I'm kind of relying on hope here to some extent, which it's not hope. I actually know better than that. I know that things do click at a certain time and things do lift off at a certain time. Every now and then something happens and you can't predict that. You can just trust. So I'm in that territory of being very much on the edge of my unknown, having to live in what I call radical trust, doing something that feels important to me and feels important clearly to the people who buy into it at some level, or who share that with me. But from time to time it feels like a lonely journey, and I think we all feel that.
Absolutely, as business owners, we do feel like that. I understand the concept of a tipping point, that you gain some momentum to get to the point where you tip and then things start to become easier and there's flow and there's greater momentum and there's greater outcomes. And it's getting to that point, and sometimes it can feel really hard and a grind to get to that particular tipping point, and then it becomes really easy and light post that.
This is a we tipping point. This is not a me tipping point. Like I could reach a tipping point, but how does that influence the we tipping point?
That's right. When I'm talking about tipping point, I'm talking about achieving what you're ultimately trying to achieve. Is that goal, and that's kind of where I see, and in my mind, it comes down to influence. What you're talking about there is you were talking to influential leaders that have a certain lens on them. So this is about an education piece, and that's what you do. You educate people to think differently about things that will actually help them have a better life. And the central point to that is their relationship with money. So that all makes sense. And so your life work really is educating people on that particular frame or platform or how we want to think about it. But the people, if we can get to the people, or if you can get to the people that are actually the most influential people that then have the relationships with and leading masses of people, then that's the fastest way to obviously achieve what you want to do. And you're doing that through business. So, and this is why we're doing what we're doing, but it takes one step at a time and one person at a time. But hopefully the one person at a time things are people that are actually influential, that have multiple relationships, which is the business aspect of it.
Well, there's a really interesting thing, and I think this is very relevant because what I made a decision last year, which I shared with you by email at the time, and this was a very powerful decision for me. Um, I asked the question, it was around exactly this topic, influence and impact. What would be the most influential direction, or what would be the best direction for me to take? Do I go the route of being an influencer, or do I go the route of creating examples that influence? And my natural territory probably is to be an influencer, is to be out there speaking, educating, and I'm doing that. But I made the decision because it felt more powerful, although it was quite a hard decision to make, that it would be better to make my main focus creating and supporting examples of what I'm doing. And so on a daily basis, I revisit that decision, and I know it was the right decision. And it was also a really hard decision for me to take because I have to step up and take far more responsibility to be involved in examples of doing that. In my business, in any business that I'm involved in, it then needs to be an example rather than just a business. I could have a business that supports me to be an influencer, and I can go out and speak beautiful stuff and make people say, wow, that's amazing, Sarah. I know that I can do that almost standing on my head. But to actually bring what I'm teaching alive in businesses beyond the level of just influencing business owners, that's a much bigger task. And my punt, if you like, is that doing that is more influential in the long run. And all the time it's like, oh my goodness, I should be speaking more, I should be doing more of that influencing. And it's like, but no, you've got to actually concentrate on making successful examples. You don't need to be out there chit-chatting. You need to be doing this, making it work, being an example of it. And then I realized the thing about that, which comes back to the daunted feeling, is like, wow, actually doing it, that's not easy. Talking about it, educating people about it, that's easy. Doing it, that's not easy. That every single person is we're educating each other, and how do we work together? How do we bring this thing into the world in a way that is new enough that we're not doing business as usual? So it's the usual challenge. It's the pioneer kind of challenge.
When you're speaking there, I was reflecting upon a course that I run called Leadership by Design, and one of the laws of leadership is leading by example. And that's exactly what you're talking about there. You're saying that you're leading by example to influence others, because that is the best way to actually lead people or influence people, by actually demonstrating what you're talking about rather than just talking about it. And that's the biggest thing. And so everybody watches and everybody sees what somebody's doing, and then will emulate that based on if they connect with it. And so I fully understand what you said there, that rather than just sort of teaching and talking about it, if you actually displayed and demonstrated and was providing a great example, then it's got so much more impact and power. And then as leaders in business, that's where the successful leaders are, and the successful organizations are the ones that lead by example, the ones that the walk the talk and all those sorts of statements that we hear a lot of the time. But it's so true, and I watch it every day, and I watch it in every single business that I've ever looked after. The successful ones have got great leaders, and the great leaders are the ones that actually do on a daily basis the things that they lead by example. They're great examples of it. And really, you're saying the same thing there, that you want to lead your business, you create a great business for you that is a great example to other people, to say, well, I led this particular way and I got these particular outcomes and benefits for the community in the world. And so I'm therefore a great example of that. So therefore I encourage you to do so as well. Because you and I both have seen many examples where people are preaching, okay, and teaching, but their businesses are not great. And so it's flawed. And you just look at these people and you say, well, you're actually not really doing what you said you're going to be doing, and you're not authentic, and you're not genuine, and you're not real. And so what you're talking about there is authentically, genuinely leading by example, by creating a great business that is living all the values that you're talking about. And that's the encouraging bit. That's the bit that is hard
That's the
on a
gritty
daily
bit.
basis, because you can be good. I talk about the 95-5 principle. You can be good and do all the right things for 95% of the time, but then you've got 5% where you don't, okay, which unravels typically the other 95%, because you get rated on your 5%. As a leader, you probably get rated on your 1%, in terms of, people only remember you for probably something that was out of the ordinary, and that happens in our businesses as well. So that's why it's tiring, like getting back to that particular point, because it's a relentless pursuit of constant drive to be a great example,
Yeah,
which is a hard thing to do.
to expand my capacity, For me, in a way, it's really about love, actually. Fundamentally, it's about being able to expand my capacity for love, which I never felt I was gifted with a lot of. Like, I didn't have that perception. I talked about this a couple of weeks ago in the podcast. But every day I feel that that's actually what needs to happen, because that's the only way that I can grow to meet the challenges, that feels right to me, that brings in the kind of consciousness that I feel is important for business. If we build our businesses on love, beauty, generosity, joy, those kinds of things, I know from there that we can create a world that is thriving. If we have more businesses based on things like that, every human being more or less responds to love. Every human being wants to experience joy. They can be, probably a murderer wants to experience joy and beauty and some level of goodness and love. I mean, these are such fundamental things. And so for me, that's really the challenge.
It's interesting, because when you talked about love and joy and happiness and all those things, they're not words that make you tired.
No.
They're words that are uplifting. They're words that actually give you energy. They're not words that actually. And so when you're talking about, and you can see just the change in your energy when you're talking that particular way compared to the start of this podcast, where you were feeling very overwhelmed with the world, and the energy was a lot sort of flatter. Whereas when you started to talk then and saying that the place that I come from, business, is a place of love and joy and happiness, you could see the energy lift, and you could see that that's where that sort of inner strength and momentum comes from, to say, well, I can do this.
That's the drive.
I know it's a big task. I know it's massive what I'm trying to do. But if I apply these particular principles, then it's not going to be as hard as what I think it is. Okay, and that's kind of the message that I just got then when you were talking, is that it depends on how we are actually, framing these things, or what the motivation is. I come back to that particular word I know a number of times, because when things become overwhelming, you've got to find something strong inside of you to keep moving forward towards getting something you want that's good. Okay, yeah. And what you just spoke about then are the elements of that actually provide that energy and uplift to give you the momentum to go to the next step and the next step and the next step. So it's all, when you talked about, it's big and there's goals and a starting point, that sort of type thing. And then you spoke about tired, and it all hangs together. Okay. Yeah. But then when you spoke then, that all started to drop away. So that's really interesting from that observation, just from this conversation.
And that really is the key, that coming from love, let's say, is the basic, which includes all those other words and some others as well. Peace is really important for me. I need to feel at peace. Anything that doesn't make me feel at peace, my entire energy is then looking for peace. And the only way I can find peace with all of these questions, this is what this is all about in a way, is to bring love to it so that I can expand. That's the only thing that works for me. It doesn't matter how much I look at how far I've come. If I look at how far I've come, That gives useful reference points because I can see, well, we've done some things and we can look at what's worked or what's not worked and things like that. But they don't take away, they don't restore the peace or give me the solutions. What gives me the solutions is tapping into love, which it says to me something like, this is possible, and it says to me I'm not alone. I don't feel alone anymore when I tap into that. I feel like, oh, I'm just part of everything, and everything, there's the whole universe is kind of behind this engagement, this thing that I'm doing, and so I can relax because it makes it not all about me. So definitely the overwhelm is also when I get into, this is about me, it's a selfish, self-centered perception of the world, of what I need to do in order to make my contribution, in order to get to where I believe that we ought to be or need to go to. It's all I, me, very selfish.
You just gave me a big insight into something that happened yesterday, and I hope you don't mind if I share
Not at
this.
all.
You and I had a meeting yesterday to talk about your business, and and there was an energy that between what I was trying to do and what you were trying to do, and we weren't necessarily aligned. And I was doing my normal monthly thing with a business, looking at the numbers, looking at what's worked, what hasn't worked, what do we do next? You know, all the very pragmatic things
Which
to
is
help me.
extremely valuable. I have to say it's extremely valuable. I do recognize that. And I want to hear what you're going to say next.
But there was just this misalignment between the two of us because I was saying one thing and you were saying another, and then you said that you'd eventually catch up to me and I'd move and and I'd be all over the place yesterday, and it wasn't an easy conversation between us because of the fact that we just weren't aligned in an energy. And what you just said then, it just gave me the aha moment as to why sometimes I can go into these particular scenarios where I'm having, monthly accountability sessions or, board meetings or advisory meetings or mentor meetings where you're sort of helping the business owner continue on with that momentum, like we're talking about, to achieve the goals. And the insight that I just got from you, okay, about you and your business, okay, is very much around this peace. Okay, so you weren't at peace. You weren't actually at peace, and there was an expansion of alignment between what we were talking about and this coming from a place of peace and love. It was that was missing in the conversation. I think is probably what I just recognized as to why we probably didn't get the best outcome from that meeting, from that monthly conversation, because we were coming from, I was probably more my energy coming from a different place that wasn't aligned with what you just spoke about then.
Well, I thought about that meeting afterwards, and one of the things I thought that many of my colleagues do in the conscious business world that I tend not to do is they will start a meeting with something that will help the group to get centered and grounded and connected in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it'll be like a 2 minute, like a little meditation or a check-in or something. We didn't do anything like that, and I don't normally do that because in my world I assume everybody's done that already today. Because that's what I teach everybody. And so my assumption is they've already done it, but we haven't done it as a group. So that's an interesting thing, especially in relation to how do we create more synergistic business or businesses where things can get done at extraordinary levels. Then we need to have a stronger sense of connection amongst each other with that underlying peace and love. But the other thing that I realized afterwards, this was my aha, or
Mm-hmm.
takeaway, was that when we get into the numbers, we get really useful information, and I got really useful information from it about how to achieve certain things in ways that are quite peaceful for me. So that was good at a practical level, but we didn't create the frame at the beginning, which I need, which is like kind of, why are we doing this? I need to be in that frame, which then connects with the love and the joy and the peace. But it's not just that, it's the actual purpose. I need to feel that purpose and how maybe the purpose of the next 3 months, this was a planning meeting, like a quarterly meeting, how the purpose of that next 3 months connects with the purpose of the business and how that connects with my purpose, because then everything's aligned for me. And when I'm coming from there, all the other things are just little practical things that need to be done. So that's me. I suspect it's not only me. I think from many conversations with you that every business owner, when they're connected with their purpose, in that moment, consciously aware of it, they feel better and they perform better. And of course, the numbers are contributing to that purpose. But I realize that I need to be very firmly rooted in that to be able to deal with the numbers. Otherwise, the numbers, it becomes things like, well, how many people are we going to get into courses? Then the people become commodities or objects. And there's no purpose in that to me. It's just like a totally disrespectful way of looking at people. And I never, ever, ever want my business to be a business that looks at people like objects that we've got to somehow get into our course so that we can meet our numbers, because that is just not what it's about. I would rather fail than do that. I won't, because it's not what I'm about, and I won't fail. You know, I'm not making a weird choice there, because it's not what I'm ever about. But that is so important to me, because the only way I create in business is by creating, first of all, inside me an experience that can be shared with other people. And so that from every time we speak about people, that the fullness and the beauty of the experience we're creating needs to be present in me, because then I know it has power, and then I don't have to work so hard. Otherwise, we have to have a meeting, we plan everything, I have to go and work really hard to implement everything, and it doesn't work. I've done that hundreds of times. It might work for other people, it doesn't work for me. I have to feel the beauty of the experience that we're creating, even through these silly little numbers, or it's just like how many people signed up for this or that and how much money did they pay. I have to feel it through that, because then it turns into more, and it turns into what I wanted. I do want more people doing courses because I believe in the education that I'm supplying, and I know that it makes a difference to people. So that's kind of like the unpacking.
Well, it's a good point. There's a lot in that, and I'm a big one for connecting people with their purpose, as you know, and we've spoken a lot about that with regards to why. What you said before is that you assume that everybody does grounding or does some sort of energy work before they go into the meeting that we had together. So you
in my business,
in your business, but
yeah.
So you assume that people that are around you are doing that type of work. So therefore, it's almost like an assumption, or it's a given that when you come into that, you've already done it. So therefore, you don't need to do it again. Similarly, that's exactly what I do, right? So I'm already working on the principle that you are connected with your purpose before you go into this particular business, because we've done that work, and that work exists, and you know the purpose of why you're doing your business. So we are not talking about people as commodities. We're not talking about these things in a yes, it is a commercial conversation that we're having and a business conversation that we're having, but it's on the basis, underlying basis, that that purpose exists, or that why exists. And I'll connect in with it with people just to test it or check in with it. But there's some people like yourself, which is great, by the way, that probably need more of that to begin with, because that, as you say, it's more uplifting, and it's a greater feeling to feel that particular way. So 100%. And then for me, knowing that helps all the relationships that I have, because I don't assume anymore that the purpose and the numbers are actually connected, that you've got to do that work and make sure that we're focusing on the purpose and the why and the business and all the great feelings that we get from that, before we get into, well, here's the nuts and bolts and the stuff that's probably feels a little bit clinical in a fashion.
Yes, and it may be also about expectations for something that's, let's say, like a quarterly meeting. It feels really important that we're getting that overview as well. But for the main thing that I notice is that it more than anything, it's about a dynamic. Excuse me. It's not so much. It's useful to do something at the beginning because it does actually make a difference, and I know that, and I should be stronger about that because that.
It was interesting though, because we actually did speak about, we did do a little bit of a gratitude conversation at the start of that, which I find very important to do is to stop and reflect. And we stopped and reflected about, the successes that we'd had in the previous period and acknowledged how awesome that was and how grateful we were about, what had actually occurred and the results and that sort of type thing. So I think that's also part of the combination of checking in with the purpose and making sure that there's alignment there, but also to celebrate or acknowledge how far we've come in that continuum as well.
So now I really know what the challenge is in business, which is the challenge in life. It's about us being able to be, first of all, we're human beings, that like the being part sits underneath all of it. That's actually what's important. So celebration and all of those things are good, but they're about the business. So they're like they're just like a subset of it. I think what's really important is that we first connect as human beings. And I feel that this is important in every single thing that we do, and why people are longing for connection and longing for belonging and things like that, which we know in research shows that that's what people are longing for, even more after COVID. Americans especially, many of them have been so isolated for so long that they're craving, just absolutely craving connection with people. I think that's what we need as human beings, is first of all to connect as beings, and that all our business is rooted in that, and it's rooted in like knowing who I am. It's not rooted in the activity, it's rooted in the being. The activity, the purpose of the business flows out of that, and then the activity flows out of the purpose. So for me, in those situations, I'm fully aware of the purpose. I don't forget that. But in order for me to translate the numbers into that purpose, I need time. I can't run at a head speed. I have to run at a being speed, which is much, much slower. And that's the main thing. If I do it at a head speed, I'm very capable of that because that's how I used to run. I know where I'll end up, which is what I did yesterday with a headache, which I haven't had for years. And I'm fine about that. It doesn't matter. I know how to heal headaches. It's not a problem. But, it doesn't work for me because it ends me up doing exactly what I don't want to be doing, which is kind of running from my head. I feel that the big shift, the underlying shift, and the reason this is important is because this is something we can each do. We don't need the whole world to change in order for this bit to change, is that we really touch in more and more to our being. Who am I? And that we see each other and know each other as human beings, that we connect with each other. We don't sit in a boardroom or in a meeting and just have a bunch of tasks to get done. But we're actually, and this is what we're all about, really. We're people who are doing something together, creating something together. It loses its spirit and its heart if you don't have that.
I think you've just given me an idea of our next conversation around sort of the business of connection, because it's really interesting. You spoke about isolation there as well, and that what we went through with COVID, there was a lot of isolation, and we're coming out of that in Australia a lot more, and we're sort of wanting our teams to come back, and yet they're not coming back. They're actually wanting to stay home, and therefore they're probably wanting to connect with other people, not necessarily the people in their business, which is important, and that's what I'd like to have the next topic sort of type thing in terms of having that conversation. But you're right, it's business is about people, and therefore it's about connection, and we've got to feel that first and foremost, and that gives you the sense of momentum and energy.
And can you imagine if we go through the numbers and we're feeling that all the time, all of us? We feel that connection. So there's room for somebody to feel uncomfortable, or there's room for somebody to have, get it wrong, or whatever it is, the things that we're all a little bit afraid of or uncomfortable about in meetings, or that there's room for all of that, because there's a recognition that we're human. But at the same time, it creates room where we've messed up for us just to grow, to get better, rather than going into shame and guilt and the things that we normally do, like, oh, I messed that up, now I'm a bad person. But actually that there's just room for us individually to say, okay, didn't do that very well, I'd like to do it better next time. And no one else needs to pass judgment on it, because we're able to see clearly for ourselves what's going on. It feels a so much better way of existing.
So the starting conversation was very interesting and big and overwhelming, and where you're at, and I feel like there's been a journey that we've gone on in this conversation, and I feel there's a lot more calmness now compared to what it was at the start. Maybe as a final thought process, what was the shift that just happened with you from where you started this conversation to where you are now?
There's probably a few things. One is, again, like you pointed out, coming back to the foundation, which is that in order to grow, for me, which is clearly required in the context of the initial conversation, because there are frequently moments where I look, it's like, whoa, there's a lot to do, or there's a lot that we need to get done somehow. That the only way I can grow my capacity is through love, because that's so expansive. So just saying the word, like you said, just saying the word helps. Remembering that that's what it's about. Remembering that that takes us forward, and that everything else either keeps us stuck or makes, for me, contributes to the world I don't want to be making. So that's really important. And the minute it comes to that, it becomes something that I can do myself. I don't need any circumstances to change in order to be able to bring more love to the situation, whatever it is, whether it's the meeting we had yesterday and my thoughts about it and how I respond to that, or to any other conversation that I'm engaged in, or any other challenge that's ahead of me. All of that, that's the bit that I need to do myself. And I know that from there, everything else will work itself out. So my life is a constant dance between remembering that, and then something's thrown at me that gets me a little bit off, and then remembering it again, and then something's thrown at me or something happens, gets me a little bit off, and I think it's all about me, and then I remember, oh no, it's actually about something much bigger than that.
And look, I think that's great acknowledging that, because that's a message for all of us, is that we just need to really tap into that sort of inner place of love and peace and harmony, and the things that we want to try to achieve that are purposeful in our lives, and constantly remembering that helps us to not become overwhelmed.
And what's important is to realize that that's challenging for probably for all of us. People will easily think that I can do that really, really easily. But it's not necessarily the case. I have more expectation that if things are challenging, that if I touch in with love, that it will work, because I've had more experience of it. But the challenges that I'm working with are much bigger than what I was working with 10 years ago. And so the call for that is kind of equally strong. For me, I think that's very important, because people often judge themselves that they're not good enough at it yet. One of the things that I've discovered is that if you really engage with the world, you always feel you're not good enough at it yet. And in a way, that's just the truth. Life keeps bringing you challenges, or you take on challenges, and you constantly need to grow your capacity. You're never going to be good enough. It's not about being good enough. It's about actually showing up and doing that again and again. So I feel that that's important, because I see so many people expecting that they're just going to get good enough at it one day and then it's all going to be super easy. My sense is we take on bigger challenges as we get better at it. And that's fun and difficult and horrible sometimes and beautiful sometimes. It's all mixed up.
I think acknowledgement's probably the best word there, because we're acknowledging that it's not easy and we're all in it together, and we've just got to help each other and keep reminding ourselves that this is the journey that we're on.
Yeah. And that love does actually make a difference. It does actually work.
Well, I think that's a great way to end this conversation. And once again, it's been a great chat. So thanks, Sarah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to The Spirit of Business with Matt Murphy and Sarah McCrum. We'll be back next week with another episode. You'll find the show notes with links and other useful information on our website, spiritofbusiness.live. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends.